Alright, so I've been away from YouTube and my emails for about a week or something like that. We just got annihilated by various forms of super aggressive pathogens. But I'm feeling better now. So, Pointlessly Perfect says, can you speak to repression, repressed material, and how it relates to the stability of the subject-object experience, please? I'll try. Do you see a connection between emotions, repression, and the physicality of awakening, and the stability of the augmentation of sensory experience, as I've heard you refer to it? Do you see a connection between the emotions, repression, let me just read the whole thing. I know I made a mix of a lot of concepts, but I'm just trying to freeform throw some concepts to you and see what comes up. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with concepts, because that's all we're ever doing here, really. So I'm happy to get conceptual. Some speakers speak to an essential aspect of awakening that has to do with the increasing capacity for repressed material to come up in the form of thoughts, emotions, energetics in the body, in tandem with the decrease in activity of the conceptual overlay that is used to actively repress. I intuit awakening has much to do with the release of the conditioning that keeps some reactions, thoughts, emotions, and appearances as a whole at a distance, as a sort of protection mechanism. So yeah, like the way you're describing it there would be how I would describe it. So so like the cognitive understanding that you're showing there is within the limitations of concept is, I would say, accurate. The thing is though, it's like it doesn't. It's kind of like I think that's what you were saying when you mentioned that what we're talking about here is conceptual, and yeah, and on this platform when we're talking about it, the message, if there is a message, is always going to be filtered through our means of communication, which is limited to concept. So it's kind of like to experience directly what those concepts are pointing to. It's almost kind of like relaxing or directing or encouraging attention through the use of those concepts directly, so that the concepts have their use, but of course they're very limited when we're talking about this, because what we're talking about ultimately isn't a concept. It's like, you could even say it's, as I always say, it's transcendent or outside of, but also including the conceptual understanding. So it's just tools. There's nothing wrong with the tools. I also, like, often people will, when I'm talking to people, they'll use the concepts, right, and then they'll specify that what they're doing is using concepts in a way that almost suggests that it's wrong, but that there's nothing wrong with it. If there's still a belief in the gravity and the reality of the concepts, then that belief will manifest in a view that might say that the concepts are incorrect or wrong, or which is true in a way, but they're also not apart from what we're talking about here. They're not separate from, they're not other than what we're talking about here. By the way, I might not answer any of these questions because, as usual, like, I'm answering the questions without actually answering what you're asking, because I go off what I see and what stands out, and I've already forgotten what you asked. I think it was about... Sorry, I'm going to have to read again. This is what happens. So let's structure this a bit. Can you speak to repression, repressed material, and how it relates to the stability of the subject-object experience? A connection between emotions, repression, physicality of awakening. So like, the way I would describe it, right, is there are assumed and deeply felt beliefs about the nature of what this is, the nature of reality, and it's kind of so far back that it's a felt sense, a felt belief, and it's assumed. So we assume it by moving straight past it and operating as though this were the case. And the augmentations that I talk about, I love that word, by the way, because it kind of it illustrates it in a way that makes sense to me. I don't know if it might be a rubbish word, but it, based off my experience, it illustrates it quite well. That the augmentation is... Someone posted a comment recently, and I just love when people describe it in a way where I just know that they're talking from experience. And you know, it's weird, sometimes it's not intentional as well. So people will talk everything, as I always say, which is a hard point to get, that we're only ever talking about our own experience. We're only ever describing through concepts our own experience. That's all we can ever do. But in this channel, I'm using that to point to something that's not a thing. So I'm never really directly pointing to it, which is what's so weird and flawed about this whole setup. That, you know, in a way, it's partially destined to be ineffective, but equally it doesn't matter. I've went off on a tangent again. What were we talking about? the augmentation and the... So what I'm talking about there is the felt reality. The felt reality of... there's like a kind of cognitive reality that's created from this felt reality that has a very unreal quality to it. It doesn't appear to be unreal until we see it for what it is, which is just a thought projection. This thought projection is projected out onto an external objective world from this felt sense of the always here subject that's in this, that's separate from it. There are... That's why in inquiry and in the traditions, it's like you hear mentioned a lot about the sense of the body. Well, like is there an immediate correlation between what is perceived and what's felt here? If we pay attention to that, then we can deconstruct that assumption. That there is a relationship going on here. There's a back and forth between in here and out there. There is an actual perception going on. There's something here perceiving something else. There's a two-way dichotomy of communication. That's just the way it is. And that's what I would describe as the augmentation, and it's based off of the assumption that there's something here. That's why when we see through this, then The natural regression to that is the self, in the most fundamental way, is brought into question. Is there actually anything here? Because if there's something here, then the suggestion is that there's something out there. I mean, that won't be clearly an interpretation until that function drops away in its reality and it's seen for what it is, which is just a thought augmentation, a thought projection that's added to experience. I mean, it's completely simultaneous. It's completely seamless because nothing's separate. But it has the effect of creating the felt sense of separation, which you could describe as the building blocks that then found the entire illusion that there's something here relating to a world out there. And that relationship has a causal effect on, in a narrative sense, in a separate sense, how I feel and relate to that world out there. If that were, this is how I'll describe it, right? Probably not the most responsible description, but like certain psychoactive substances, certain dissociative substances like K or horse tranquilizer or mushrooms or DMT will have this dissociative effect where it effectively removes the augmentation completely, which makes you very vulnerable because and the thing that's still wanting to suggest that it's here is trying to hold on to a conceptual version of reality that it can use to orient itself. I wouldn't recommend anyone do this unless you're taking the responsible steps to do it in a controlled and safe environment, which is more difficult than it seems. And it's something that you can't take lightly, because when you remove that augmentation, you're going to get an enormous fear response. It doesn't happen all the time. It depends on how deep the experience goes. But when you remove those augmentations, what so-called reality is in the absence of that is not something that's understandable. It's not something that the character, the self, can operate in the way that it's used to operating in. So you can get this enormous fear response because nothing has a context anymore. Nothing makes sense in an understandable way. So you'd be looking around and you see what car, tree, my hand, where I'm looking from, gone, like just gone, and that felt sense of the reality of the subject that this is all happening to as an experience will automatically keep trying to come back online, and that's the limitations of psychedelics. That you need to prepare for it if you're going to do it properly. If you're not prepared for it, if you don't take the necessary precautions and steps going into it, or if you've never done it before and you don't know how it's going to play out, it can be really, really. I mean, people have sought like therapy and stuff like that because they've went into it and they've not known what they're getting into. So the context, the building blocks of the felt sense of the separate self, once removed, free up sensation in a way that isn't tangible, in a way that it can be interpreted into a storyline as it relates back to me. And that's frightening because you're directly coming into contact with, or you're not separate from, all of the emotion, all of the repression that this assumption has led to accumulate, and it's not something to be taken lightly. This is something that we go through in this awakening thing. In a way, it's the existential thing that you get from that, the emotional movements that come from that, because they're not being contained in a manageable narrative, which they never really were anyway, but it seems to be that way, it's worse. It's worse because it's not just a peak experience, it's the fabric of experience as a whole. Like, it has no end, it has no coming back to what I know. It doesn't have that. It's once it's seen that it's not there, you can't unsee that. You can no longer continue to pretend that there is a real continuation, there is a real narrative, there is a real thing here. You pass a certain point in this and that's gone in its reality. And it's replaced with a totality that doesn't exclude anything. A singularity that's completely intangible as a whole, or from any sort of relative position within it, because the position isn't actually there. It was never here doing what it seemed like it was doing. There was never an agent here that was in control of this. It's frightening. It is frightening. What makes it uncomfortable is the habituated attempt to come back, form a view, and interpret this in a tangible and understandable, knowable way. What we're where we're releasing to with this, there comes a point where that you can't do that with the same reality anymore. There's no you that continue to reappear with the same felt reality, and that comes with a lot of emotional. It's like what you described this very well, that the function of repression is the illusion of separation, the illusion that there is something here standing back from, or maintaining a view within, a position within this, as something separate from it, wherever. That will appear in different ways for different people. Maybe for me it was like there was a very immediate augmentation that was like, I'm here, this is my limit, I'm looking at a world out there, I'm relating to that as something that inherently exists independent of my perception. You see that that's not here all the time, you see it come and go in a sense as a thought. Something about looking clarifies that that's not actually happening in the way that it was, as a fundamental quality of the way it is, or reality. So then what happened for me is it projected itself out into invisible, formless, infinite awareness, like universal subject, universal mind, one mind, this is a dream, something like that. But what was happening there is it was taking the assumption from a localized position here and projecting it out into an infinite version that was much more comfortable, much more inclusive, much more free, but it was the same thing. And in there was an assumption of locality in a different way. So it was like a more of a simplification of that same subject-object function, is that there is a subject here somewhere experiencing this objective experience, wherever that might be. When you start looking like an immediacy with locality specifically for where that is, then that starts to fall apart. So that kind of meta augmentation loses its reality, and past this point it's no longer something that you can interpret or perceive or describe, no longer something that makes sense as something subtly other than what is. So it gets more simple, but that sense of self has its basis in the fundamental complexity, a fundamental two-ness or separation. When you challenge that, then all of the repressed emotional stuff that, like you described, that function was using to manage in a way, or seemed like it was using to manage or ignore or avert from in a way, stops working. So then all there is sensation and immediacy. All there is thought and immediacy, without a referential point of view that's managing it, that needs to do something about it. So there's a helplessness and a release in this that came with me with an enormous fear response. I don't know if I'm talking about what you're asking. Yeah, but you know, this position continues to attempt to reform until it's seen that that's not actually happening. It was never there. It's not like something was lost. It was never there in the first place. It was always this way, which isn't a way. So with that, there's a kind of a forced acceptance through clear seeing, a forced acceptance, and with that comes a inevitable trust in this that was never there, because the position within this always doubts, always relates to and tries to control. The agent in here is always trying to manage. When we see that that's coming from nothing, that's not being controlled, it's not like there is a greater, somehow personal, universal intelligence that exists separate from this or in this by the according to the rules of that subjective position. It becomes so simple. It becomes so immediate, so spontaneous. So it's like before simple. It's the most simple. It's simple in a way that doesn't need to be perceived as such. It's just inherent. Then there's a naturalness to this that is clear that it was always like that. There's a simplicity and trust in this that is happening the way it is happening, and there's nothing me in here can do anything about that to either influence that in any way, because that function of influencing circumstances is being seen through. So it's kind of at this point that I can't really explain it anymore, because it gets too simple, and anything I add to it's going to be digested by that dichotomy, that duality. Or it can be, because it's not actually there. The duality isn't actually there. Which again comes back to this believed assumption. And the thing that frames it, that takes that view, or assumes that view and frames it in a way that's disturbing, in a way that makes it seem that I have to do something about this, or I have to stand back from this and understand it, it's a movement, it's a complexity, it's an added to, it's an overlay, it's not inherent. It was something that was never actually here in the way that it was suggesting that it was. Alright, so I'll move on. I think the key in this is the simplicity and the immediacy, the non-dual nature of sensation, and how it's just inherently this as it is. That also includes the thoughts, but there's this strange assumed function in thoughts that makes this seem more complicated than it is, whereas it's actually the most simple thing possible. So Tracy Lynn says, "Hi David, what is our relationship and responsibility to the physical body's needs after things start to shift? I'm at the stage where the body is of value, but also aware of its non-part in this process. Is this still the ego story holding on to things, or redirection its attention to reassure myself? I feel like I'm in the in and out stage of this, going back and forth between something while also knowing that this is all just openness and things. Any pointings you can offer in between?" So how do you know that there is a body? Or is there a body? Like in immediacy, in the simplicity of the direct sense, is there a body? What do you have to subtly and quickly add to experience, the sense experience, to confirm or not confirm that there is a body here? What do we have to add to this? What is being added to make it seem like there is a body and there is something here which has a relationship to that body? Or there's something here that is aware of that body as something within it, somehow separate from it. Yeah, if there are no thoughts, is there a body? So kind of similar in the way to the last question, that there's a thought experience that's being augmented over the direct sense, that is suggesting that there is a limit to me, that there is a body, that there is something here that I have a relationship to. That there is separation there, and that's inherently the way it is. So it's kind of like, I could maybe point through those limitations by saying, because if there is a belief, and an assumed belief that there is a body, then there's also going to be the belief that there's something here that I need to comprehend about that there's something here that maybe I need to understand about that, or there's to be done. Like, it can become a thing, it can become like a problem that needs to be solved, based on that assumption, but what if we just release the assumption? So like, for example, would again, as a conceptual thought experiment that points directly to the sense experience, if the sun wasn't there, would there be eyes? If there wasn't an appearance, would there be eyes? Would this apparatus be necessary? So directly, is there any difference between the eye and what's seen? Is the eye something within the world that's seen, or is it the same thing in immediacy? What do we have to add to that to interpret I have eyes and they're seeing a world out there? What is the immediate experience? So I lift my hand up in front of my face and I see appearance. What do I have to add to the immediate experience to interpret? And it's very fast, it's very assumed to be the way it is, and it seems inherent until you see that it's being added. What do I have to augment or onto experience through thought to decipher that this hand is what I am, that is separate from the totality of the appearance? Would the apparatus of the I don't know the specific terms, the ears, the hearing apparatus, would that exist if it wasn't for sound? Is there any apartness between the apparatus of hearing and the object that's making the sound in the sound itself? Or is it completely interdependent? Is it completely instantaneous, simultaneous? Is there anything other than just the sound? So there can be a kind of density, and it's like a felt belief that is felt as a visceral sensation somewhere in the body, that which is very much like a instinctual kind of animalistic survival thing that somehow gets caught up into the narrative, somehow gets complexified into a story about control and security and what I need to do about things, that is, just like the last question, is very much tied to the immediate and visceral sensation of there being something here, somehow separate from an outside world out there. And you can see why that's necessary, because we need to react to danger. We need to orient ourselves around the world and life depending on our felt sense in order to function properly and be safe. But that builds up into a belief about a belief that gradually over complexifies itself into something that generates a feeling of not rightness or neurosis or like suffering, something like that. And it's very much held together by the augmentations that suggest that there needs to be these interpretations. They need to be projected out to manage this. And like the interpretation that you're talking about, it's a very fundamental one, that there is a body here, somehow separate from and relating to, in a relationship with an external world that's inherent, that's there in the absence of the perceiver. Because if you believe in perception, then there's also the suggestion that there is a world here with inherent value that exists independent of the perceiver. When there's no perception, when perception is not being augmented onto the experience as an interpretation of what's happening, then it's just simplicity. And you can't say anything about it because it's too immediate. Anything we would say would be based upon this idea, this belief of that there is perception, that there is separation. So it's like in breaking down those interpretations and that augmentation and looking directly at it, you see that it doesn't need to be there. It's like when it's not there, it's not noticed. But when it's like the noticing apparatus comes online, then it becomes important. And it's like, it was always this way and this is the way it has to be. But when we start really looking, like you're doing, like we start to see that it's not there all the time, and the way that it's suggesting it is. So in simplicity, before the mind moves, is there a body? Or you could even frame it in a more simple way as all of this body. Yeah, and what you're saying about it coming back online, coming the back and forth thing, that notice it's when you're not looking, it's when you're not doing the inquiry, it's when you're not paying attention, the assumption comes back online. Then it seems real again, and then you kind of bring into question that assumption that what is happening here that's making it look like something it's not really. It's essentially not. It becomes questionable, and then it's like it's seen through. Like, okay, there is no separation here. There is a thought function that's coming online to perceive and interpret that there is separation here, that there is a body here apart from all of this. There is something aware of the body that's apart from the body, or whatever. So it's like looking in the right place. What you're doing is looking in the right place, and it gets more and more simple. The interpretations stop mattering as much, and it gets more simplistic and immediate, instantaneous. And it's, like I said in the last comment, it's before simple. It's like simple without one here interpreting it as such. Simple before the point of view. Simple before the interpretation. Because if we're operating past the point of perception and interpretation, we're operating with the felt assumption, the believed reality that there is a dichotomy, a duality, a relationship going on here between me, the practicer, and the object of practice, which can be anything. But in just looking at that thought function to see what's happening, to make it seem and feel being the key word, that it's like that, in immediacy, looking will just break down that augmentation, and eventually it will just stop coming online with the same felt reality. Then conventionally you can, go to the doctor and say, I'm having this issue with my body, but that has nothing to do with the believed realness. It doesn't have to have anything to do with the believed realness of that as a fundamental reality. I remember what I really enjoyed about like sport, physical exercise, is that I used to do like stunt performances and stuff like that, like taking really risky, dangerous movements and acrobatics and stuff like that. And what I loved about it is in the instant of the performance, there was no body, there was only immediacy. I framed it before as the body merged into the environment became the body. This was before like awakening or nonduality and so on. But it was in that it was like a forced simplicity, because you don't have there's not the time there in that instant to add a conceptual overlay or an interpretation to separate this up. It's too instantaneous, it's too fast, and that's what I really enjoyed about the doing that kind of work, because in that instant it was complete freedom from all interpretations, and I didn't need the interpretations of body, danger, technical aspects of this and that. I didn't need any of them for this to move, for this to perform, for this to express. It wasn't fundamental, it wasn't actually there in the way that it was suggesting. Anyway, this video's went very long, so I'm gonna call it there. I'll get back to everyone, by the way, on email, and I think there were some other comments, but just run out of time today because I've blabbed on. But I'll talk to you next time.